Hey, I'm back with another episode of The Bitter Pill. Today I want to say a few words about impeachment. I'm going to try to make this brief to make up for the overly long video I did last time and just try to hit a few highlights. So, as you've probably heard, uh, Donald Trump was impeached in the House of Representatives, and the vote was very partisan. There were 229 Democrats who voted to impeach Donald Trump, 230, I believe, on the other article of impeachment. There were two no votes, one present vote among the Democrats, and then all but two of the Republicans voted against it, and one nominally independent person. No, wait, never mind. I'm not sure who the independent was. Justin Amash, maybe? Anyway, uh, so Trump was impeached for high crimes and misdemeanors involving, supposedly, acting both directly and indirectly through his agents within and outside the United States government. Trump supposedly corruptly solicited the government of Ukraine to publicly announce investigations into a political opponent, former Vice President Joe Biden, B, a discredited, they claim, theory promoted by Russia, supposedly, alleging that Ukraine rather than Russia interfered in the 2016 U.S. presidential election. Actually, the evidence suggests that it was Ukraine rather than Russia who interfered in the 2016 election, but that's a subject for another time. Anyway, so point two, with the same corrupt motives, President Trump, acting both directly and through his agents within and outside the U.S. government, conditioned two official acts on the public announcements that he had requested. A, the release of $391 million of U.S. taxpayer funds that Congress had appropriated for the purpose of providing military aid and security assistance to Ukraine to supposedly oppose Russian aggression, and which President Trump had ordered suspended, and B, a head of state meeting at the White House. So that's what is claimed. In all of this, they say President Trump abused the powers of the presidency by ignoring and injuring national security and other vital national interests to obtain an improper personal political benefit. He also betrayed the nation by abusing his high office to enlist a foreign power in corrupting democratic elections. Well, let's see what other people have said about that. First of all, uh, folks have raised questions about how good the evidence is that the things that were alleged that I just read to you are true. Jonathan Turley writes in the Los Angeles Times that this would be the first presidential impeachment to go forward. It did go forward, of course, with no credible or at least uncontested crime at its heart. That does not mean that the Democrats' case is necessarily invalid. The problem is that this is the thinnest record of any modern impeachment, as well as arguably the shortest impeachment investigation in history. In inexplicably rushing to an impeachment vote, the House is foregoing the subpoenaing of key witnesses who could shed light on the potential abuse of power. Instead, the Democrats insisted we should go forward on inferences or interpretations rather than delay further. And he goes on to say he just doesn't see how the evidence that was presented in the House hearings, impeachment hearings, clearly established a quid pro quo. In other words, established that Trump threatened to, or administration officials threatened to withhold aid from Ukraine in order to pressure them to investigate Joe Biden and Biden's son and the Burisma Corporation that Hunter Biden was on the board of directors of at $50,000 a month. So there are three direct conversations on the record. Trump's call with Ukrainian President Zelensky, where if you look at the transcript, it doesn't state any clear quid pro quo. He asks for a favor, but doesn't promise anything in return for it, or demand that they do anything. And in later conversations with U.S. officials, Trump denied any quid pro quo. Another complication is that Zelensky, the Ukrainian prime minister himself, wait, is that prime minister or president? President, sorry. President Zelensky himself has said that he did not discuss any quid pro quo with Trump. Moreover, the funds were released on September 11th without apparent action on Ukraine's part to do the president his requested favors. So I don't know. I'm not sure whether or not they've begun this investigation that Trump requested or not. One can certainly claim that this happened only because Trump got caught, but the problem is that such a claim is based on presumption rather than proof, and so therefore it's guaranteed to fail on that basis, at the very least, in the Senate, which is Republican majority, and you have to have 2/3 vote to kick a president out of office. As Max Blumenthal and Aaron Mate put it in an article for the Gray Zone, there's growing evidence, albeit circumstantial, as we've discussed, that President Trump briefly froze U.S. military assistance to Ukraine for political goals. But a question that needs to be asked is, well, I mean, how exactly does not selling weapons to Ukraine or giving weapons to Ukraine, how does not doing that harm our national security? And what exactly does arming Ukraine accomplish? So there wasn't military aid to Ukraine under Barack Obama, and yet nobody claimed that he was endangering our national security by not doing so. Under Trump, military assistance has been provided to Ukraine, and it's helped prolong a bloody proxy war with Russia, killing thousands in Ukraine and enabling far-right Ukrainian forces to do their dirty work, and of course U.S. weapons manufacturers and lobbyists for the military-industrial complex get rich off of these sorts of policies. And if you don't know, basically the situation with the Ukrainian government is that in 2014 there was a military coup in Ukraine in which a government came to power that was dominated by pretty right-wing forces, including a considerable number of literal fascists, actual literal fucking Nazis. And since then, there's been a democratic election in Ukraine in which, as in the U.S. with Trump, a celebrity in Ukraine, a nationally known comedian, Zelensky, was elected president. Someone who had not been a politician before. And I don't think he shares the politics of those who came to power in the 2014 coup in the first place, but those folks are still in the government and the military. And this came about with U.S. assistance, including intervention by Joe Biden and by some of Hillary Clinton's staff. One thing that Blumenthal and Mate point out, or let's see, actually, yes, Blumenthal points out, is that there have been efforts since Zelensky was elected to try and negotiate peace in this bloody conflict with Russia. So, as long as we kept giving aid to the Ukrainian military, which seems to kind of apparently operate semi-autonomously from the government, Blumenthal contends that directly interferes with President Zelensky's efforts to make peace with Russia. There's a constituency for peace throughout Ukraine on the pro-Russian side and on the nationalist side, and Zelensky was elected to, in part, to seek peace with Russia. And Blumenthal goes on to say the international community, so to speak, is behind these peace efforts, but who's against it is neo-Nazi elements in Ukrainian society, as well as hardliners in Washington, who I suppose you could also say some of those are neo-Nazis or fascists oriented, including people who are close to Joe Biden, who've been wanting to constantly turn up the heat against Russia and use Ukrainians as bullet stoppers. And it's all a very corrupt mess. Blumenthal points out, who put together the plan that McCain advanced in the Senate for Ukraine? It was the Atlantic Council and the Brookings Institution, two centrist militaristic think tanks in Washington. And who funds them? Raytheon, a major weapons contractor, one of, I believe, the top 5 military contractors in the world. And the defense secretary right now, Mark Esper, who's a former lobbyist for Raytheon. And Raytheon, I guess, is a company that makes the Javelin missiles that were recently given to Ukraine. Raytheon has also contributed to John McCain's campaigns in the past. And the list goes on of people who are involved in this corrupt process where Raytheon and other weapons contractors are getting rich off of this weapons deal with Ukraine that basically doesn't take into consideration the interests of the Ukrainian people at all. And another person who was very involved with the weapons lobby, takes a lot of money from them, is Adam Schiff, who happens to be the leader of the impeachment inquiry, and he was also the leader of the push in Congress of Russiagate for the past 3 years. Schiff's largest donor in a previous campaign cycle was Northrop Grumman, gave him almost $13,000. Raytheon chipped in another $10,000. And all weapons manufacturers accounted for over 1/6 of Congressman Adam Schiff's total donations. So there's this uproar in Washington about Trump briefly freezing military assistance to Ukraine. That is the big crime, the huge scandal that Trump is being impeached over, is that he allegedly temporarily held up military aid to Ukraine, where there are literal Nazis in the Ukrainian military and government. And that's supposed to endanger our national security. That's we temporarily didn't buy weapons for them. Another person who's chimed in on the nature of the impeachment process is Ralph Nader, former presidential candidate, and some of his colleagues. And they point out that, as you might have already guessed or already know, this impeachment process is being pursued in a very, very narrow way. And Nader et al. Point out there's no reason why that should be the case, really, other than that certain interests in Congress don't want to broaden the scope of the impeachment hearings. So they say, uniquely among wayward presidents, Mr. Trump is shattering our entire constitutional order. And Nader et al. Put forward 12 different charges of impeachable offenses against Trump. Several accounts are per se impeachable and need no more fact-finding. For example, defiance of congressional subpoenas and oversight. Well, they did put some of that in the impeachment resolutions. But in any case, spending billions of dollars on the border wall, several $billion, I think it was almost $4 billion, was illegally appropriated by Trump from the military budget without congressional approval. And you're not allowed to do that. That's an impeachable offense. Continuing or expanding presidential wars not declared by Congress. Most presidents for the last few decades have done that, but it is an impeachable offense. So each of at least the last 3 or 4 presidents could have been impeached because they declared war or went into war without a declaration of war by Congress. Trump has obviously blatantly violated the emoluments clause, enriching himself and his family through utilizing his position as the president, and continuing the policy engaged in by Obama and Bush of extrajudicial assassinations of people far and wide in different parts of the world without any sort of trial for whatever offenses they're accused of. Narrowly focusing on the solicitation of bribery and an illegal foreign campaign contribution connected to Ukraine, while leaving the vast number of other constitutional wrongs or usurpations unsanctioned, would be disastrous, written about a month ago, for moving public opinion in favor of impeachment. Well, let's see how their Nader and company's prediction is turning out. Well, look at that. Trump approval up 6 points since the launch of impeachment inquiry. And also, I don't know if I have it up or not. I guess not. Also, Trump is beating every single one of the Democratic presidential candidates, including Bernie Sanders, in the polls right now. I think he has a 3-point lead on Joe Biden, and that's the closest. So the impeachment investigation so far has not done the Democrats any favors. Another thing that Trump could conceivably be impeached for, and I guess this would have to go to trial, but there seems to be pretty good evidence that Trump is engaged in sexual assaults on numerous women. Funny how since he's been president, that hasn't been talked about very much. You don't hear about it in the media. I don't even hear about that from my friends on the left very much, but that happened, apparently. And they point out as well that the President of the United States has a duty to faithfully carry out the nation's laws. That's part of the President's duties under Article 2, Section 3 of the Constitution. And you have numerous instances of corporate fraud and violations of regulations on pollution, ignoring climate change, pretending that it doesn't exist, not enforcing workplace safety regulations, um, and just allowing the nation to fall into a state of ever greater disrepair as far as infrastructure is concerned. Flint still doesn't have clean water. That's the most famous example of that. Trump has asserted that under Article 2 of the Constitution, I have the right to do whatever I want as president. Pretty shocking that he would claim that. And he's kind of done that in a lot of cases. Okay, just to briefly go into a few details here. Article 1, Section 9, Clause 7 of the Constitution prohibits federal government expenditures, but in consequence of appropriations made by law. So Congress is a body that has the authority to appropriate money for things like, for example, President Trump's border wall with Mexico. So in violation of that clause that I just mentioned, Trump has committed to spending billions of dollars far in excess of what Congress has appropriated for the wall, and that money is apparently coming out of the military budget. Okay, I already mentioned emoluments clause. Trump has refused to place his assets in a blind trust. He continues to profit from fancy hotels that he owns, heavily patronized by foreign government officials. He's permitted his family to commercialize the White House, and just in general engaged in personal and family enrichment on a pretty unprecedented scale. Another one. Those treaties that the U.S. has pulled out, such as the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, the INF Treaty with Russia, the Paris Climate Accords, the Iran nuclear deal. Well, they only mentioned the INF Treaty here, but Congress didn't agree to that, and the president isn't supposed to be able to do that by himself. But I mean, I guess you're getting the picture now that all these things have been happening without Congress really trying to do much about it. In some cases, they've complained about it, but no action taken. I already mentioned that Congress is who has the authority to take the nation into a state of war. And we are in a state of war in several different countries: Libya, Somalia, Yemen, Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan. I guess there's drone warfare in Pakistan as well. And special forces are operating in African nations other than Yemen and Somalia and Libya. I guess we still have troops in Libya. But anyway, so of course this has been done by other presidents, but Trump is still doing it. He's actually literally military occupying the oil fields in Syria, not allowing the Syrian government or the Syrian people access to their own oil as a means of basically strangling their economy, along with the draconian economic sanctions that have been placed on them. And that's completely illegal, and nobody in Congress seems to be particularly concerned, almost nobody. Tulsi Gabbard introduced a resolution pointing out the unconstitutionality of U.S. forces occupying part of Syria and calling for withdrawal of U.S. troops from Syria, pointing out that it hasn't been authorized by Congress, and that actually Trump has openly admitted that They were there to not only prohibit Syria from using its own oil, but actually take the oil. And guess what? Zero co-sponsors of her resolution. Just sent to committee. So basically what we have here is a situation where the vast majority of the impeachable things that Trump has been doing, Congress has been letting him get away with. Well, why is that? Well, one important thing to note is just the way that Congress has, and it's the Democrats that we're talking about because the Republicans haven't been trying to impeach Trump. They've centered their opposition to Trump on the most reactionary basis possible, the World Socialist website points out, namely the claim that by withholding military aid to Ukraine, he undermined U.S. national security, quote unquote, i.e., the interests of American imperialism and the military-industrial complex and various other corporate interests. The articles of impeachment allege that by temporarily suspending the release of $391 million of U.S. taxpayer funds, Trump has compromised the national security of the United States. And, well, let's see, we already went through why they say he withheld the aid. Now, this is the first quote-unquote national security impeachment. The charge that Trump, quote, betrayed the nation, i.e. that he is a traitor, is a continuation of the anti-Russia campaign the Democrats have pursued since 2016 based on the absurd claim that Trump is an agent of Russian President Vladimir Putin. And while it is an absurd claim, we can talk about that in detail on another occasion, but basically you can go down a very long list of things that President Trump has done that are very much against the wishes and interests of Putin et al., of the Russian government and the Russian people. So at the press conference announcing the articles of impeachment, Democrats argue that the impeachment and removal of Trump from office was necessary prior to the 2020 elections because he would otherwise solicit foreign interference to rig the election in his favor, as he had supposedly done in 2016. Commenting on this rationale for impeachment, Aaron Mate, writing in The Nation, says, this rhetoric is not only transparently disingenuous, but also dangerous. By the Democrats' own logic, President Obama is guilty of a far worse offense than his newly impeached successor. Whereas Trump briefly paused military funding that was ultimately delivered to Ukraine, Obama refused to send that same military funding at all. So why wasn't Obama not a traitor for giving weapons to Ukraine? And why is Trump now considered a traitor for that? Okay, so Aaron mentions again that none of the Ukrainian officials who have been interviewed regarding this alleged quid pro quo where Trump supposedly blackmailed the Ukrainian government by withholding aid in order to get them to investigate Joe Biden and others. They say, well, we don't think that's what happened. And the only person who directly heard any of the phone conversations, I forget his first name, Sondland, said that basically he was just assuming that there was a link, that there was a quid pro quo link, and he told that to a Ukrainian government official, but he didn't have any proof of that. I haven't mentioned yet the other article of impeachment that was filed against Trump. Basically, obstruction of Congress is what it involves, where Trump interfered with Congress's ability to have witnesses come and testify. And Obviously you can't do that. However, um, the same issue arises here, Aaron Mate points out, that arose with the Mueller investigation. Trump also disrupted that investigation, but um, I mean, if you haven't actually committed the crime that uh, you're obstructing an investigation of, it just doesn't seem very credible to go after someone on the obstruction charge unless you can establish that the person doing the obstructing is guilty of the underlying offense that they're obstructing investigation of. You're just not going to win in the court of public opinion with that, and certainly not going to win in a Republican majority Congress. Mate points out this quandary could have been avoided had Democrats opted for what seemed to me the most practical option from the start: censure, as Representative Tulsi Gabbard just proposed the night before the impeachment votes. And I believe I have her censure resolution here, or the text of it. I don't think it's been. They just sent it to committee, preventing it from coming up for a vote before she even had a chance to get the text of the resolution inserted. But in any case, so she talks in it about the Ukraine charges or things that Trump did wrong in the case of Ukraine. It seems like she believes there's some sort of case there, but as she points out, all these other unconstitutional and reckless actions, she characterizes them, that Congress hasn't gone after Trump on at all. Violating the War Powers Resolution and Article 1 of the Constitution by carrying out of acts of war without congressional approval, such as the military occupation of Syria and just various actions in other countries. And she specifically mentions the illegal occupation of Syrian oil fields, where they're not only trying to deny Syria access to its own oil, but also trying to make that oil available to American companies. So, what's our oil doing under their soil? It's our oil. We're going to take it. Continued support for Saudi Arabia's genocidal war in Yemen. Obviously, there are major war crimes there, certainly impeachable. Abandoning nuclear agreements and treaties, such as the INF Treaty with Russia and the Iran nuclear agreement. Increasing the risk of nuclear war and nuclear proliferation, or with Iran, or for that matter, Russia. And this is also blatantly unconstitutional. And so the resolution goes on to call for censoring Donald Trump. And you might wonder, well, a censure is just basically a statement. You did all these things wrong. It doesn't take action. It doesn't bring Trump to justice, so to speak. But if he's not going to get impeached, he is impeached, but if he's not going to get removed from office anyway, because you have a Republican-dominated Senate, which is, the Senate is where impeachment trials are conducted, and you have a weak case anyway, then how are you holding Donald Trump accountable for things he did wrong if nothing actually happens to him, and if in fact he goes up in the polls, he becomes more popular and enhances his re-election chances as a result of the impeachment investigation? It really doesn't, the reason just doesn't add up. Okay, well, why might Congress be taking such a really kind of seemingly foolish approach? Well, um, this happened just a couple of days before the impeachment votes took place. The National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2020 appropriations of $738 billion, I believe, more than half of the discretionary spending in the budget for the military. And that's substantially up from what the military budget's been in the past. Even in the past, it was very bloated, far greater than any other countries in the world. And look how folks voted on it. So these same Democrats who voted overwhelmingly to impeach Trump, as I think I mentioned, the impeachment vote looked like this. Hardly anybody except Tulsi Gabbard and a couple of other Democrats didn't vote yes on the impeachment resolutions. But look at the votes on military spending, Trump's military budget. 188 Democrats voted yes, 41, including Tulsi Gabbard, among the Democrats voted no. The outcome was similar in the Senate. Both Democrats and Republicans overwhelmingly voted for Trump's military budget. So that's something like 82%, I think I figured out, of Democrats who think that Trump is doing these horrible things and he's a national security threat, and they're giving him all this money for weapons. And not only that, but they actually did wind up authorizing money for his wall after vociferously opposing it all this time, right before this vote, and passed the record military budget just today, I believe it is. They were set to pass a free trade agreement that Trump had supported. So where's the resistance? Where's the resistance? It's just not there to any meaningful extent. So Ben Norton kind of sums up, Ben Norton of the Gray Zone, colleague of Max Blumenthal's and Aaron Mate's, sums up his take on impeachment as follows. The correct take on impeachment, when Dems challenged Trump for his genocidal war on Yemen, his mass killing of civilians in Venezuela with a criminal blockade, estimated 40,000 people in Venezuela dead as a result of economic sanctions, his illegal sanctions on Iran, which are having a horrible effect there as well, Nicaragua, etc., his huge tax handout to the rich. If Democrats start challenging Trump for those things, then I'll care and support impeachment, he says. And he goes on to point out Trump just oversaw a military coup in which fascist Christian extremists who do Nazi salutes violently overthrew Bolivia's elected leftist government and are now massacring and hunting down dissidents. When will the Democratic Party speak out against that? And I mentioned the other day, only a handful of Democrats have done so. Bernie Sanders, Tulsi Gabbard, Ilhan Omar, not too many other people. Tulsi Gabbard's husband kind of sums things up. There's the delusions of congressional Democrats, or apparent delusions, and many other supporters that by impeaching Trump, we are seeking justice, we're bringing about justice, and we're going to show Trump how wrong he is. And Abraham Williams points out what reality is. So the House voted to impeach Trump. The Senate is virtually guaranteed to exonerate Trump with the Republican majority and 2/3 needed to convict Trump, and what appears to be a weak case. Trump's approval ratings may further increase from what they already have. Trump campaigns on exoneration. I won, I beat them, I'm not guilty. and Democrats lose swing and red districts in 2020 and say hello to second term of Trump and perhaps a Republican majority again in the House and continued in the Senate. After this plays out, I wonder if it will have been worth it. Okay, well, that's about all I have to say about this. Please like and subscribe, and send some money my way to, God, I can't remember what the website is now. Anyway, I will put links to articles in the description of the video, as well as a link to, or links to other things. So I hope you've enjoyed this and you agree with me. I will talk to you soon.